everyone! Today we are going to sew the Stella Dress together. I will show both views. This is view 1 with a circle skirt in light cotton, and view 2 features a flat skirt with Bodice. This is view 2 in a viscose fabric, and next you will see it in a light cotton fabric. So for view 1 you can choose any kind of light fabric, a viscose, a tencel, polyester crepe, or a woven cotton or linen, even a light denim. The drape will be different and it will be equally beautiful. For view 2 it's important to choose a fabric that's tightly woven, like this cotton I'm showing here, because the Bodice seams need to be sturdy. I also made it in several viscoses. There is no absolute rule, but it tends to be more loosely woven. Now, as always, wash your fabric and let it dry, just like you will for your future garment. This is to avoid shrinkage on the finished garment. And then press it, fold it, and cut the pattern pieces. First, interface pieces that need to be interfaced. So interface the cuffs, plackets, collar and collar stand. I always prefer a woven fusible interfacing as it gives the most professional finish. Then, pin front bodice to back bodice at sides and shoulders with right sides together, matching markings. You can then stitch and serge these seams. Next, let's take the skirt pieces. If you chose view 1, which is the easiest one, you just have to do 2 side seams. First, I strongly advise to stabilize the upper edge of front and back pieces, because as they have a curved shape, they will tend to stretch out of the shape, and it will be very difficult then to sew them to the bodice. So to do this, just use a 3 mm straight stitch within the seam allowance. Then, with right sides together, pin one front skirt piece to the back skirt piece at the side. Stitch, serge, and repeat on the other side. If you chose view 2, first take back skirt pieces. Be careful here because they are slightly different from front pieces. They have a different width. With right sides together, pin back skirt pieces to one another from top of skirt to the marking on the side. Stitch, backstitch several times at the circle to make sure the seam is sturdy. And once the seam is done, slit seam allowance at circle marking. Repeat this step for all 6 pieces of back skirt. Pin from top to side marking, stitch, and then slit at the marking. Once it is done, put skirt back aside and take skirt front pieces. So in the same way, pin and stitch 3 pieces for left skirt front and 3 pieces for right skirt front. Then you will pin each skirt front side to skirt back, always the same. So it's always pinning from top to side marking, stitch and slit at circle. Here is the result. My skirt is fully sewn. And now I can start inserting Bodice. Here you can see a Bodice. You can see at the tip there is a marking. Slit at this marking. And then insert the codet by pinning it from bottom to side marking. And of course, the markings should match. Here you can see a codet I have already pinned to both skirt pieces on the side, and it peeks out a little over the skirt pieces at marking. You will see here, you can see it peeks out a little. This is normal. And now I can stitch both seams. Here it is. I have stitched all my seams. Then I will serge. To serge the codet, I will show you a quick technique. Maybe it's not the prettiest inside, but it is quick and sturdy outside. This is what we want. I will start with left seam. Then I will serge the top skirt seam and the right codet seam without stopping in between. Look at the video here. When I do this, I'm also catching the top of left codet seam allowance in the seam. Here, you can see better. I'm catching it. It's not a problem. It reinforces the tip of the codet, which has a lot of strain. Here you can see the finished result. See on the inside, it forms a little cone and it prevents a hole to open here. Here is the outside and you can see no hole showing, so we did a good job serging the seams. Now let's take the belt. On each side there is a buttonhole, so let's fuse a small piece of interfacing, mark the buttonhole and make the buttonhole on the right side, of course. And once this is done, you can pin the skirt and belt to the bodice. So pay attention to do it in the right order. First, put the belt on the skirt with right sides together. Then put the bodice on the other side of the skirt, so with wrong sides together. Match markings. And pin. And stitch. You can serge if your fabric is very lightweight and tend to fray, but don't do it if the fabric is heavier, like a cotton poplin, because it would add bulk to the belt and we don't want bulk here. So here you can see it when it is done. You can press the belt towards the bodice and press the other seam allowance towards the inside of the belt and top stitch on top and bottom. Now let's take the placket. Fold it lengthwise, following middle line. like this, and then press one seam allowance towards the inside, and do it for both plackets. Then pin right side of placket to wrong side of dress, matching markings. Once it is done, stitch and trim seam allowance. Now let's take a closer look at the bottom of the placket. Fold it on itself with right sides together and pin it. When doing this, don't catch the seam allowance. Stitch, and when it is done, trim seam allowance at bottom of placket, trimming as close as possible to the corner. Then turn inside out and push the corner. Now let's take the dress on the right side. So press seam allowance toward the inside and pin the placket over. Then top stitch, and this is it. Your placket is done. Now let's take the sleeves. The first step is to make a bound slit. So I did a video on this topic and you should see the link on the screen of the YouTube video. When this is done, you can stitch and serge the side seam of the sleeve, but this is the easy option. The best way is to do a French seam, because this way, when you wear the sleeves rolled up, the insides look prettier. Then, take the cuff, fold it lengthwise with right sides together, stitch both side seams, leaving top seam allowance free, then trim the seam allowance on both sides as close as possible to the corners. Flip inside out. If you trimmed close enough to the corners, you will have perfect corners. You can push them to make them more square. Now press the whole cuff and press one seam allowance towards the inside. Here is my pressed cuff. Now let's take a closer look at the sleeve. Let's take it on the right side and pin the cuff. On the side where the seam is closest to the slit, there is nothing to do, but on the opposite side, there are two things to be done. First, fold the slit tab towards the inside, or the slit binding. like this. And then make the pleat. To make the pleat, bring both lines together and fold the pleat toward the slit. Pin in place. Then pin the right side of the cuff on the side where seam allowance is still free to the wrong side of the sleeve. Stitch, press the seam towards the inside of the cuff and pin the cuff on the right side and top stitch to finish. Sew buttons and make buttonholes on the cuff. Note that the fold is on the buttonholes side. Buttons are sewn on the opposite side, on the side of the sleeve side seam. Now we can attach sleeves to bodice. Make gathers at sleeve head to even out the ease and pin sleeve head to armhole, using a lot of pins to even out the ease. Stitch and serge the armhole seam. Now let's do the collar part. If you chose a shirt collar, this is for another version in black I'm making too, you will begin by constructing the shirt collar, which is this piece, number 4. You will stitch all around the edge up to the marking and leave this edge free, like this. Then trim seam allowance. Start by trimming corners, getting as close as possible to the stitches to get perfect tips. Then trim the rest of the seam allowance, leaving about 5 millimeters. Then let's take collar stand. Same. There is an interfaced and non-interfaced part. Here I'm taking the collar with the non-interfaced part on top. Interfaced part of collar stand will go on top of it with right sides together, and non-interfaced part will go on the other side of the collar with right sides together. Match markings. You can see there are several markings to help you. Now pin and stitch, leaving the seam allowance free on the lower edge of collar stand. If you do the stand-up collar, if you don't want a shirt collar, it's exactly the same, except you only have the collar stand without the collar. It's also an option. So then, in any case, stand-up collar or shirt collar, you have to trim the seam allowance, about half of it, flip inside out, and press. Here is my pressed collar. Then I will take the interfaced part and I will fold and press the seam allowance towards the inside. And to do this, first I will cut the corner here. It will make it a lot easier and it will avoid bulk. at this specific spot. Here's my pressed collar. Now I can attach it to the dress. So I will take the non-interfaced part and I will pin it to the wrong side of the dress. Then trim the seam allowance, leaving about half of it. Press the seam allowance towards the inside of the collar, and now on the right side of the dress, fold collar over the seam you just made and top stitch to get a perfect finish. Here is my finished collar. The last part is the waist tie. Stitch the center seam if you were not able to cut the piece on the fold, and press the seam open. Then you need to fold the tie the same way you would prepare a bias, except this is not cut on the bias because it's a waist tie and we don't want it to stretch out of shape, so we cut it in the straight of grain. And to prepare it, I'm using this little bias making machine thingy. It's really convenient. Pull the fabric through it and then press what's coming out of it. Once it is done, fold the tie once again lengthwise and press again. So now it's folded in 4 thicknesses. Then stitch all along. Now insert it in the casing using a safety pin. So I pull the safety pin through the buttonhole and drag it inside the belt through the fabric until it comes out through the other buttonhole. You can finish the ends of the tie with a little knot. And once this is done, you only have to do a narrow hem to finish the skirt. I know this is not a quick one. Take courage, put on a good podcast or playlist and go on. It's really worth it. Think of this billowy skirt flowing around you. And voila, your dress is finished. Just sew buttons and buttonholes, tie the knot and go party with your new dress. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and if you want you can post your makes on Instagram with hashtag #FPStella. So I hope to see you there and see you very soon for another video.